Okay, the next element of Russian political culture we need to look at is talking about Slavophiles versus Westerners. These are kind of the two distinct set of like attitudes about politics, attitudes towards how the state should orient itself towards the people. So when we talk about Slavophiles, first is kind of a strong belief in nationalism, and when we talk about Russian propaganda at the end of this, or we talk about elements of Russian propaganda in the final set of notes, we'll kind of see that Russia definitely believes in, a Make America Great Again style of nationalism, where they want to defend kind of their heritage and culture, and kind of an ethnically Russian way of life. And this is kind of seen in the second one, right? That they want to defend Russian interests, they want to defend Slavic culture, they want to defend historically who they are and what they want to be. This is also seen in a strong military. We talked about the rise and role of the military in the political institutions lecture, and we've seen recently that Russia has been willing to flex their military strength, right? We talked about incursions in Chechnya in the early to mid 2000s. We've talked a little bit about what they've done in the Ukraine over the last couple of years, where they are flexing their military muscle to show that they're strong. And remember, during the transition period between Trump's election and his inauguration, where he wanted to talk about, strong nuclear forces, that he and, Putin got in a little, tit for tat on Twitter and in the media about having strong forces. So there's kind of this pride in the notion of national self-defense. An interesting one to look at is kind of a rejection of Western values. This tends to be a rejection of like full-blown liberalism. It's interesting to watch the United States and Russia kind of critique each other about human rights abuses, where individuals from the United States will talk about poor conditions for working class. They'll talk about Islamophobia. They'll talk about harassment of individuals in Russia. They'll talk about the imprisonment of journalists. And, Putin in interviews where he's been asked about Western human rights pressure has said things about, like the American police killing minority populations, looking at repression of different, subgroups in the U.S., where he'll kind of fire off and say that human rights are kind of a facade, that the state will protect what the state needs to protect. They also tend to be against integration. This is kind of seen when we talked about differences in the way some of the ethnic and religious minorities have been treated, because of strong beliefs in Russian Orthodox Christianity. You've seen kind of high levels of persecution of non-Orthodox Christians. You've seen persecution of the LGBT. So they're against integration in that sense, but they're also against integration in elements of global culture, where they're quick to kind of saber rattle in the UN that they don't think that they need to fit the mold of everybody else, that they need to worry about making Russia Russia. Westerners tend to be the exact opposite of Slavophiles, that they are reformers, that they want to change things. They want to, make Russia fit more of a liberal democratic mold. They want it to have a lot more free market tendencies, that they want those kinds of things. In terms of integration, both in terms of social inclusion of peoples and integration into Russia and kind of the greater political sphere, that Russia should kind of play along with the rest of the world, and they're open to Western values. So when we think about Putin supporters and the notes on Putin's political party from the previous slide, what do you think Putin's supporters tend to be? Do they tend to be Westerners or Slavophiles? Kind of look at your set of notes from the previous lecture, and then come back and hear the answer. Putin's supporters tend to be Slavophiles, obviously, because they believe in kind of anti-Western values. They tend to be strong nationalists, right? They believe in that kind of vertical integration of power, or power vertical, that we talked about in the first two sets of notes. When we talk about forms of participation in Russia, voting was compulsory under the Soviet system, that there was 100% of voter participation. In 2008, there was around 70% election or participation in the presidential election. That was about 65% in 2012, but it was plagued with little bits of scandal here and there. For example, Chechnya, which tends to be, kind of anti-Putin, anti-hardcore Russia, Putin magically won 99.8% of the vote in Chechnya, which kind of sniffs as, something might be rotten. In the capital of Grozny, Putin got 1,482 votes, and the former communist leader only got 1. So that's 1,483 votes, but there were only 1,389 people who were registered to vote. So there was 107% participation in that precinct, right? So these are things that definitely, aside from authoritarianism, show that the level of free and fair elections in Russia are very, 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 very much questionable. When we talk about civil society, it's been slow to emerge since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. You've seen some emergence of sectors of civil society with the 1993 Constitution, but there have been a lot of obstacles put in place under Putin, so from 2000 to present. You have to register with the government to be any form of a civil society group. There are requirements to report the kinds of things that you talk about, what you are doing, etc. And the government has the right or ability to supervise groups. Groups that are highly critical of government policies are monitored and banned. It is very, very common for the Russian government to investigate sources of income. They will block registration of groups that they think will be critical of the state. They will use police to harass groups that they don't believe agree ideologically with the Russian government. And since Putin's re-election in 2012, there were new laws that restrict the activity of non-profit organizations that limit foreign financing in Russia. They are required to register as foreign agents, kind of operating as like an international entity. And he's changed the definition of high treason in Russia to include assisting a foreign organization. So when we talk about people kind of falsely being tagged with corruption in Russia, one of the things that we can kind of point to is people being charged with high treason for working with an NGO or working with any kind of external organization. So participation in groups, right, that are pro-state are up, that people will participate in those, and we'll talk about why Russian propaganda is so effective at forcing people to kind of blindly support the Russian government. Protests are something that happens in Russia. In 2007, there was a new law that restricted the use of public protests and any kind of demonstration. The new law allowed individuals to picket if there was a distance of 50 meters between each individual protester. Any kind of mass action is forbidden if it does something like it blocks access to transportation, social infrastructure, or it does anything to block everyday goods or pedestrian traffic. So it becomes physically impossible for groups to get together under this law. There's also a list of specific places where these kinds of protests or mass action is forbidden, virtually to the point where it's impossible for any kind of large group demonstration. If you wanted to have a group with more than 100 people, it has to be authorized, and you can't have more than one person per every 2 square meters. If this protest were to happen near a government building, there's another layer of kind of massive bureaucratic red tape, which means your ability to kind of lawfully protest or lawfully demonstrate is very difficult. Probably one of the most notable crackdowns on protests in recent Russian history happened in 2012 when the punk rock group Pussy Riot was arrested for protesting in front of a Russian Orthodox church. So they, in 2012, performed a punk prayer, which it's a song that they wrote, protested the role that the Russian Orthodox Church played in supporting Putin in the upcoming election. So a little backstory on Pussy Riot. They were formed the year before the protest. They are all women. They are hardcore left feminists that are very, 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 very opposed to the Putin regime. When they were arrested, 2 of them were arrested and sentenced for 2 years, citing hooliganism and being motivated by religious hatred. And they became kind of a big boutique cause throughout the rest that, everybody was talking about, Free Pussy Riot, that they got a high degree of social media attention, and they were used internationally as a symbol to show how the Kremlin, to show how Russia could not deal with political opposition. In December of 2013, the Russian government responded to this by widely celebrating a mass amnesty law passed by the Duma, supported by Putin, which freed the 2 members of Pussy Riot. When the 2 women were released, they, in a press conference, criticized Putin. They promised to fight for prisoners' rights. And people the international community saw through this political action, this political maneuver, because it happened right before the Sochi Olympics, where the Russian government was trying to clean up their image on human rights issues, that even when Putin says he doesn't care about them, when the world stage is about to focus on you because of, an international athletic competition, they need kind of good PR. You can find some interesting interviews with the members of Pussy Riot they showed up on The Daily Show, on Colbert, on a couple of national syndicated media outlets where they kind of talked about the level of dissent that's actually tolerated in Russia. Another protest movement in Russia is called the Other Russia, and it's a large grouping of individuals from both the left and right side of the political spectrum. They formed in 2007, 2008, and they're kind of notable for orchestrating a mass protest on July 31st, 2009. They initiated a series of monthly protests that was held on the 31st of months with 31 days to affirm a right to free assembly, which is put forth in the 1993 Russian Constitution in Article 31. So it's a very interesting symbolic protest to do so. On December 31st, 2010, kind of a year and a half into the protest movement, a large number of them were arrested for kind of the same laws that were cited in the arrest of the members of Pussy Riot. So there's a very low tolerance for acts of public dissent in Russia. Where civil society is strong is the creation of youth groups. that allow different types of moderated political participation around the youth. There are marches and demonstrations that are allowed in these youth groups, but they are symbolic, right? It's against corruption. It's against individuals who oppose the government, that they're not directed against government officials. The largest group in the youth group in Russia is Nashi. Nashi is kind of a pro-Putin, anti-government opposition group. And a lot of people equate the existence of Nashi to being the exact same thing as Kosmol, which was the youth wing of the Communist Party under the Soviet Union. Kashi is subsidized by the government. They receive large grants from the government and state-run entities. So a lot of people see this as kind of a wing of indoctrinating the youth, right? That if the goal to socialize the youth in Russia is to get them to participate politically in a productive way, and the way the state would see this as productive is, right, they are, young Russian nationalists, that people see this as kind of a increasing trend toward authoritarianism, right? Some of the most disruptive groups in political systems are the youth, because the youth tend to be more individuals who want to incite change, more people who are more willing to question nationalism or patriotism. So creating this group in Russia and having these mass demonstrations and organizations that don't have to adhere to some of the laws that we talked about on previous slides is kind of a smart propaganda move, because you are socializing the young public to participate in a way that allows the state to uphold their power. In addition to youth movements, Russia is still really, really good at creating very intriguing forms of propaganda. You should watch this video, and it's recently taken kind of a resurgence after John Oliver did his piece on Russia. Think about the Obama girls, where they sang their song about Obama. You had the young girls who put together their song that they sang at like Trump rallies. This is a music video for a song called Man Like Putin. And the goal is to kind of talk about how, the sweet Bond villain character that is Vladimir Putin is kind of the ideal masculine figure that everybody should either strive to be or want to have in their lives. So you should definitely kind of watch this, because it's a very intriguing 3-minute film. The other thing that Russia has done, and this is a 1-minute news clip kind of covering the initiatives to get the youth out to vote in 2012, where Putin and his political party wanted to tag virgin voters. So there are a lot of these videos that have a lot of awkward kind of sexual overtones to them, about why people want to have Putin as their first time. So like there was an ad of a young woman going to the doctor about asking about safety and protection, and it's clearly alluding to like a young woman asking about sex, and it's choose Putin for your first time. There's another awkward one with a young woman like looking for love at a fortune teller, and it's Putin. And then there's a really awkward one with a young man being drug into a voting booth by a very scantily clad, attractive woman to give him a rockin' good first time in the voting booth to also vote for Putin. So all of these attempts to kind of appeal to the youth through odd, sexually infused commercials, really, really good songs like Man Like Putin or, youth movements are things that is kind of being done to reinvigorate youth participation in the state. This is the end of this set of notes. The last Russia lecture that we'll kind of look at and play with is kind of the role that Russia is playing in the world today. We'll look a little bit more at things like the Crimea conflict. We'll look at the newfangled relationship between Putin and the United States in terms of what if Russia played a role in the election, why President Trump has a strict admiration for Vladimir Putin, and those kinds of things.